Welcome to part 2 of The End, this podcast that we've drawn up from the ether with me, Les, Rodger, and of course Gavin Buckland, all based on Gav's trilogy of books, Money Can't Buy Us Love, Boys in the Blue Stuff, and The End, which pretty much charts Everton from the start of the John Moores era in the 60s right up until the start of the Premier League era in the 1990s. Last time we spoke about the identity of the club. We had a little sort of meander through the 60s and 70s. I think this time we're going to pick up in the 80s and Howard Kendall, have a look at his management and how the club did then. Weave it into a little bit about the 60s and then end on a little bit about, what the freaking group can learn from all this and what they need to do differently. Yeah. So the 80s, the 70s was a decade that probably not as bad as people say it was sometimes, but not as good as maybe some remember it. I think the interesting thing for me, just before we go on to Howard, was the Bob Latchford stuff. My dad loves Bob Latchford, and I think any fella of a certain age, hero worships Bob Latchford. But it was interesting to hear about the peaks and troughs in his career. And it's kind of a bit like sort of Everton through the decades, isn't it? There was big highs, but there was quite deep lows as well in that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we were talking before we came on about like sometimes reality is different to what you sort of think it is. And one of the things, and it goes to not just Everton here, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is general themes, isn't it? Really, is a lot of some of the greatest, the most loved Everton players spent a lot of the time trying to leave the club. I mean, Alex Young did, Neville did, and Bob. There's a great story. So, why did I find that story out after the fact? Is when I found this out when I was researching the book on the third book, The End. Is when Jim Greenwood retired, he did a sort of series of interviews about when he was Everton's secretary, as it were. And you'd be chief executive now. And he said when Bob was trying to leave the club, he was coming in from Southport and Bob lived in Formby. He pulled up at the same set of traffic lights in Bootle, and Bob got out of his car and handed Jim a transfer request through his car window. And had a set of traffic lights. And you're thinking, oh no, I missed that story. And that was it. And that's what, and that goes on. I mean, like all employees, your relationship with your employer is peaks and troughs, doesn't it? It's not necessarily a linear relationship. Great players who really, look happy on the outside and they say love the club. Internally within the club, can have a completely different relationship. And that goes for a hell of a lot of players. And I'm not just talking about like Neville, Bob and Alex Young there. There's a lot more players who are Everton greats, but who's actually... And the relationship with the club was awkward, and
because the boss changes, doesn't it? That's the point. Your boss changes, and managers have their favourites, and perhaps none more.
And bringing it into the Kendall and Harvey era. That was the one of the reasons why it all starts to fall apart, doesn't it? Because you have in the 80s, you have, and when Howard's Howard recruits players, and then Colin becomes manager, and those players aren't Colin's players, and so the relationship changes, as you say, Rog, and that's really important, and and then what happens is you get factions, don't you? I'm a believer is that even in the mid-80s team there was two groups of players, wasn't there? There was the players that Howard had bought, your Trevor Stevens, your Kevin Sheedy's, Peter Reeds, Andy Gray's.
Yeah.
And there was players who come through the youth team reserves, your Kevin Ratcliffe's, Graham Sharp's. And I think I've put Southall on there, actually, because he played for the reserves quite a bit, who were Harvey's men, who were there. And I think there was two groups there. And I think what happens is, then is when the changes, when Harvey becomes manager, there's a lot of people whose loyalty was to Howard, not Colin. And that causes an issue. And then you get like people like Sharpie and Kevin Ratcliffe who were Colin's men, and who were the most vocal at the time in terms of defending Colin in public, and since then, because their loyalty was to Colin, and there was a number of players, I think, who had a difficult relationship. Not a difficult relationship with Howard, but there was flashpoints, and Sharpie and Kevin. Sharpie and Kevin like great players with Howard, but I mean, I don't think Kevin was the captain. But he'd say himself, and I've heard him say, so he didn't have that great a relationship with Howard. He wasn't massively close. And Graham, Graham had a long-standing, the number of issues with Howard that carried on until he left the club. And there's if you read Sharpie's book, he's quite bitter about Howard, really. And it's strange, isn't it? Because you always think all sweetness and light, and everybody gets on and stuff, and that's never been the case in dressing rooms. And so that's all great when you're winning.
Yeah,
but it's when things start falling apart and those factions, they come more to the surface. And it was interesting. There's a line in Pat Nevin's book I thought was really interesting, was that even we talk about, I think we spoke about it in the first pod, was that we talk about like the players Colin brought in were on bigger money than the players who who won titles, and that led to a bit of understanding resentment. Pat said in his book, and he's intelligent, insightful fella, isn't he, Pat? He trusts his judgments. He said there was already issues in the dressing room when I came.
Yeah.
And, so that's what happens. When you win it, you can disguise those. When it starts, then it can come more to the surface. I thought that was a fascinating line, really.
I thought it was... I think that, sorry, Gav, the other thing that Pat said, I remember him telling me, actually, when I had him on a podcast back in the day, was how Harvey sent his daughters Harvey's daughters made a tape of like indie music for Colin Harvey to play to Pat Nevin when he picked him up from the airport, because he was away on holiday in Greece or something, because Chelsea had been relegated. And there was this call from Everton, which came via the hotel reception, and Nevin was on his sunbed, and they came out and said, Everton, whose agent said, Everton want to sign you. Oh, great. So he got on a plane, and Harvey picks him up from Manchester Airport and puts this tape in of the Bunnymen or something, or whatever it was, that Harvey's daughters had made. So Harvey was like quite a family man, wasn't he? And he took that into the workplace. Whereas I think Howard was much more of a solo character who had his mates, and if you were in Howard's gang, you were in Howard's gang. Whereas Colin was a bit more, I don't know. Mitch tried to be a bit more inclusive, but it was difficult for him to do that.
But that's your coaching, isn't it? Isn't it really? Yeah. I think that's why Colin was a coach and Howard was a manager. And if you've ever been in the company together, it's quite obvious who was the manager and who was the coach. And Howard was, I wouldn't say loud, but he was gregarious on occasions. And Colin I always found Colin quite quiet, and he was a little bit of a scuttler. You know what I mean? He'd move around, and where Howard was welcome to my world. Always have a cigar, and all this. And I think that works well when you're a partnership. And what you have, Colin's the stern coach, and Howard was Howard had light and shade as man management. For all we're talking about here was fantastic. But he did have issues, and I think Colin suffered a little bit, as you say, Rog, because of Howard's gang, and that could be when you've got it's like that Ferguson. What did he say? Everton were like a bit of a band of brothers. That's great when you're winning, and what happens is, and there's a 70s cricketer. I'm going to go 70s cricketer because that's my favourite subject ever. Is remember the great Australian team under Ian Chappell, Roger, in the early 70s?
Sure. Yeah.
They were very much of like the Everton, a real closely knit band of brothers. You had the Chappells, the Dennis Lilly, Rod Marshall, that type of stuff. Fantastic team. If you were an outsider going into the dressing room, somebody like, say, Graham Yallop, who later captain Australia, Kim Hughes, you found it very difficult to get into the group. You were excluded. And I think that explains a lot, of Everton in the mid-80s. You were that tight a group that you were a little bit distrustful for outsiders who came in, because your strength was your collectiveness, and you tend to be, distrustful of outsiders. They're not as good as us, or that type of thing. And what you wanted really is to people to welcome. That's how the best dressing rooms.
Correct.
Where, and I'm not sure whether Howard, Howard picked up on that.
Haven't we always been a bit like that though?
Yeah.
Trying to get accepted at Everton Football Club if you're not a former player, and if you don't score a hat trick on your debut, like Tony Cottee, who was arguably never accepted anyway.
Well, Tony wasn't. Yeah, I mean,
like that.
It was interesting. One player that never appeared to have a problem was Whiteside, because Whiteside was a really good player, and he obviously
liked to drink, and he
liked to drink, and I think there's it's great being collectively a strong group, work for each other, and all die on the same hill, all that type of stuff. But within that, you've got to be welcome to outsiders. And I don't, from what you read, and there's those two sides of every story, isn't it? What you read since, and you sort of get by the way people are and stuff. I don't think that group was, and I think in the medium to longer term, we suffered as a consequence. That's one of the reasons why I don't think we kicked on the way we should have done. Is because one of the great strengths of that unit was actually ultimately one of its weaknesses.
Yeah. We've seen that.
I think that's right.
I mean, even in like some of the worst teams we've seen in the last few years, we've seen that there only becomes a split in the camp, and you hear about, well, these players are the manager's boys, these players aren't, when things are going badly. If you're on a nice run of form, it very rarely shows, doesn't the cracks? I think people can get past it. Yeah,
absolutely. It's only when it starts going wrong that they become more apparent, and it's very difficult to fix them. And I think that was one of the problems Colin faced.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was very surprised, again, reading the book, Gav, that how poorly Howard treated some of his real superstars, like Sharpie in particular. We can argue about what Sharpie's like now, but, back in the day, Graham Sharp was integral to that European Cup winning team, the 2 league titles, FA Cup and all of that. He was absolutely front and centre of that team. And he was treated really poorly by Howard. And he wasn't the only player that he treated badly, which is surprising when he has this reputation for being a superb manager, being, like you say, Mr. Popular with almost everyone. And I don't think he was like that in truth.
No, and that's not necessarily down to personalities. I think that's just the way he was. I think there's a difference between ruthlessness and nastiness, and think there were on occasions where Howard crossed the line. I mean, if you remember in the early 80s, remember Alan Barley in the early 80s, Howard publicly tore a strip off him on the coach coming back from Arsenal after he got beat 1-0, as in front of all, as in like tore a strip off him. And footballers, the young men, they're not like, dare I say, old, more mature. Say, I was got your age, lads. I'll leave you out that conversation. They're effectively young lads. And Howard tore a strip off Alan Barley, and Alan started crying on the coach. And you're thinking, that's not great, is it really? And also, he hung Billy Rice out to dry, didn't he? When Billy, he dropped Billy for being overweight rather than sort of saying he's being dropped for a breach of club discipline. I'll sort it out. He went public with it and made a few jokes about it, and he's humiliating him, and he's basically saying, don't buy Billy Rice. And I thought that it was just curious that he had this thing in him, I think, as a manager, that I think he did cross the line occasionally. He obviously, it's in the book, so I won't talk about it. But he messed Graham Sharp about terribly when Sharpie was on the verge of moving. And the same with Kevin Ratcliffe. He messed Kevin Ratcliffe about. He was a skipper. Those two players that contributed as much as anybody to the success of the club in the mid-80s. And Howard's treatment at the end of the career, rather than giving some favours back, he actually was worse than what you would expect. And I think he did the same, I think, with Nev as well later on. And I think there's that darker side to Howard, and he was. I think he's a lot more. Howard's a lot more complicated person than what I think the everyman persona the holding of court and all this. Great man manager he was generally. I think there was a darker side to Howard that obviously also manifested itself in his dare I say social activities and I think that was that I think when it's in his second spell, I don't think that was very helpful. In terms of his management, because it was quite obviously, his drinking, for want of a better phrase, was probably affecting his judgment. And I'm not just saying that. There's at least 2 books by former players, well 3 now I think, but Pat Nevin, Stuart McCall, where they talk about that openly. In certain games where Howard was under the influence, and that must have affected his judgment and his standing with the players, and it was part of this complexity of him as a person. There's a little bit of at the same. You spoke last week, the last pod, didn't we, about the similarities of Clough and Taylor falling apart a little bit of Forest in the early 80s, and Everton, and Harvey and Kendall doing the same 10 years later, and the common thread there between Clough and Kendall is obviously they're off the pitch demons, affecting their judgments as well, and how the partners related to them, and I think it's something. When I was doing the book, I've got to mention this because it has, and I don't want to go into the finer details. I didn't go into but you're obliged to, because it's an important part of the story, and I think it's all part of this wider these personality traits I think Howard had that are not necessarily apparent, and it contributed, I think, to a managerial career that, when you think you're probably the best manager in Europe, the age of 40, 41 in the mid 80s, to 10 years later you're at Notts County.
Won nothing more, did he? He won nothing more after Everton.
No. I think he did. I think there's some stuff in the mid 90s. He obviously left Notts County under a cloud, but I think, I don't want to use the phrase cleaned himself up, but I think he realised when he was, I think at Sheffield United he did well, didn't he? And I think he publicly said then that he'd reined it in.
Yeah, well,
a little bit, and that was reflected in his performance at Sheffield United. So he did a good job at Sheffield United in the circumstances.
The thing about the sort of a darker side to personalities like that, I think you get that with a lot of footballing greats, don't you? There's a lot who've got demons, and there's a lot who've got a darker side. You mentioned Brian Clough. I can't imagine he was a nice fella to deal with all the time. So there's a lot of these managers and players who've got these darker sides. I suppose it's when and how it comes out, isn't it? Because you will get players who are receptive to getting a strip torn off them. But like you say, Alan Bailey, as a manager, the important thing for you is to know that he's not a player who would take that well. And you shouldn't really deal with people in that way, should you? The good man manager is all about how you deal differently with different players' needs. And
bullying went on in all dressing rooms. I think that's sort of something that was established. I mean, even the great Liverpool team, bullying went on. With some of the people that came in. I mean, Michael Robinson, for example. So
I mean, if you watch
the
Damned United, you've got classic Don Revie there, haven't you? Don Revie and his mates in the Leeds dressing room. That was a real cabal.
And he
ruled with a rod of iron.
Exactly. And then that's part of the problem then, because you had people like I'm not going off on it, like somebody like Terry Orr found it very difficult to be accepted when he started getting into the team, because he wasn't part of the group.
With Billy Bremner and
he wasn't part of the Jazz Bremner axis, and that's also the case with other clubs. This is not just an issue with Everton. It's all football clubs. It's how it's managed. I mean, Liverpool managed it just by winning trophies all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
That, and it hit some dressing room disquiet, and I think but ultimately Liverpool, it starts to affect them, doesn't it? Later on in the decade, and we're judging it differently, aren't we? Today's standards, where there's lots of stuff that went on that just wouldn't go on now. So most people would say, I think, thankfully, but it was certainly there at Everton, but it was certainly there at other clubs. Saying that though, I mean, for balance, Howard was a brilliant man manager. I think generally, Yeah, and
can we just touch on loyalty though for a second? Can we touch on loyalty with Howard, because I think there's still confusion about why he left us and went to Bilbao.
Yeah,
and then there's confusion about why he left Bilbao, and did he do that to put himself in the frame for the England job? And then there's considerable confusion about him leaving in '93 and that resignation.
Yeah.
So, this loyalty, and obviously binning Man City for us when he came back second time around, I understand the complexities of him as a character, but, the whole loyalty bit, I'm really interested in why he left Bilbao, and he's still lauded in Bilbao, and he's our greatest manager, of course he is, and what he achieved, we'll always remember that. But like you say, looking back on it wasn't as all sweetness and light.
No. Well, exactly. There's a separate pod about who is our greatest manager, by the way, Hodge. To be fair,
is it?
I think there's a.
How many votes for Mike Walker?
Yeah, well, yeah. That's it. I think Harry.
Favorite.
Yeah, Harry, Katzer, and Howard. I think there's an interesting discussion there. But this goes back to what we were saying before about like how people's relationship with clubs is not all sweetness and light, and Howard is a prime example of that. And I touch on this in the book, that Howard's greatest ever manager. Let's just say that for the sake of the tape. I dispute that, but and you think, Howard loves Everton and statue and all this type of thing. But that wasn't Howard's relationship in the club in the mid-80s.
No.
Howard, as we know, in '83 got a load of stick off the fans. Understandably so, for poor performances and the leaflets and all this. And there was obviously the stuffed dog on his garage door, and I think he said some of his kids, getting stick at school, and he never forgot that.
No.
At that stage with him, he played in a friendly in North Wales, not to play in centre midfield, wouldn't go to the touchline because of the abuse he was getting off the Everton fans on the it was a testimonial game in North Wales on a touchline, and he never forgot that, and that stayed with him. And I think, he spoke about that, and I've mentioned this, several times where he'd forgiven but not necessarily forgotten. And so his ties to the club in '87 were certainly not as strong as the ties to the club that were sort of in later life.
Yeah.
And there was because he hadn't forgotten the treatment that he'd had, and I think that contributed. If he felt like leaving, I think that contributed to him leaving, because I think, as I say, the relationship with fans is certainly not as strong as what you'd like to think now. As part of the good news, fairy tale story. It wasn't like that at all. He still held the scars of the treatment he'd had and his family had had, and he'd still remembered that. And and that's understandable. That's just human nature, isn't it? The hypocrisy of fans, really, isn't it? That we're all, there's a great line, isn't it, when we won the title? I think it was John Robertson of Daily Mail said that, the fans shouting on the terraces, there's only one Howard Kendall. That was one more than what he wanted 12 months ago, and so we're all guilty of that, and Howard never, you underplay that aspect of Howard's feelings to your peril. That wasn't right at the top in terms of the way Howard's regarded the club, because for the simple reason, and the fans, the number of times he mentioned it in interviews, he's still mentioning it in interviews when after he's left Everton. It's never far away, and I won't say he was bearing a grudge, but he wasn't far off. And he so when you have this thing in '87, don't you, really, that he's saying, and this is where sometimes the archive can be unkind on you. He's saying, when we win the title in '87, we've only just built the foundations here. We want to move on, to build like Liverpool type empire. And 4 weeks later, he's gone to Bilbao. Well,
do you think he saw the writing on the wall with the squad there? Because there's been a lot about that squad that was possibly his greatest managerial achievement, winning the title that season with that squad, because the injuries and the quality in the squad probably wasn't as good as previous years. Do you think he saw, and then maybe there's a bit of self-preservation in that, and like you say, he wasn't as attached to Everton because of what had happened with the fans, but he saw like this probably isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say his greatest managerial achievements. I think winning the title in '87 is one of the great managerial achievements. To be fair, there's absolutely no way that a club with 23 players, and let's face it, some of them are bang average, should win the title in those circumstances. Help that Liverpool weren't that great, but that's not the point. Coming off the back of the double disappointment the year before, and I think, and because I think if you're that close to the sack as a football manager, and you see the other side, the darker side, and what's awaiting you, I think you learn self-preservation, don't you? How to look after yourself. It makes you stronger. And I think part of that self-preservation with Howard was ensuring that, make sure to get a few bob in this job. And I think that came to the fore in '87. He'd obviously had this thing. I'm not going to spoil it, but talk about his relationship a lot with Barcelona in the book. But he'd obviously had this dalliance with them in '86, where he's being quite open about possibilities of going there. He said about the going there, and I don't think Colin would have gone with him, but that opens his ideas up to maybe going abroad, which is fair enough. But I think when Bilbao came, he was, I think, it's self-preservation. It was quite obvious that actually it was a team that needed regeneration, rebuild, and if you use 23 players, you need to do that, don't you, in the season. It's quite obvious, and I think he felt that I could ruin everything that I've achieved in 4 years, in 2 years. If the rebuild doesn't work, I've ruined the reputation. Go out at the top. No, and when you go abroad as well, if it doesn't happen for you, you can still come back like you did with him at the same level as what you left. Your reputation the same as what it was when you left. And I think there was a lot of self-preservation in that, because that's what the Everton job had taught him.
Yeah, well, that's it. When you put it in the context of that early experience,
absolutely,
because you can't underplay how bad that was as well at the time. It was.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
It was awful. But that makes it all the more intriguing for me why he came back.
Yes.
Well, that's a good question in itself, isn't it? I do think the Bilbao thing, he was a little bit, and I'm not sticking the boot in Howard, but I think it's important for balances. He was a little bit disingenuous, Howard, in that he'd said that he was going, that he got the same offer as what Everton had offered him in his new contract. And, but you're paying 60% tax in Britain, you're paying 20% tax in Spain, and you've got like 130,000 golden handshake, so it's not the same. And, but people didn't really care about that. I mean, this is one of the strange things, isn't it? Again, it goes back to like sort of what you believe is the truth and what was the truth. Is that there wasn't a wailing of gnashing of teeth, was there, of Everton's supporters when Howard left? Yeah, and this goes back to his relationship with the fans. It wasn't like saying Bill Shankly leaving Liverpool in '74 and Tony Wilson being on London Road, and they're all like amazed that he'd gone. With Everton fans, it wasn't like that at all. It was just, Howard's gone. That's Colin's here. It's all Colin's doing. We're cool. And we spoke about this, I think, on the first the first pod. And again, that's not what you would expect. When you look back on it now. And I think he came back, I think, because Swales had browned him off, I think, over the England job. I think that was one of the issues where Peter Swales, when I talk a lot on the possibilities of becoming an England manager. And I think that was one of his other motivations for going to Bilbao, Les, that foreign experience doesn't count a lot when you're England manager. And I think Swales had browned him off in 90. When it was clear Robson was going, and
he was the
Swales was deputy head of the England International Committee that chooses the manager, and one of the leading candidates is your club manager. You've got an enormous conflict of interest there, haven't you? That sort of thing happened. Have you ever heard Tony Copeland's stories? Tony Coton was the City goalkeeper, didn't he? He said in his book, didn't he, that City had to pay him a bonus if he played for England, and he was going to be playing, and I think he reckons he got dropped at the last minute because he, would have cost City money because Wales had influence in England setup, and I think there was a little bit of, and there's just a few other things going on there. I think when Everton came back, I mean, I don't know if you're obviously not. That's on the third, but how he ends up back at Everton, the whole sequence of events where he ends up back, it's great.
It's extraordinary, but isn't it also Everton's issue? We talk about Everton all the time. Everton is this thing, this sort of ephemeral thing. But you mentioned a number of sliding doors moments in the book. The chase of Revy, discussions with Franz Beckenbauer, discussions with Bobby Robson, but particularly around the time when Howard walks out in '87, and he is the first, and to my recollection, the only league-winning manager who leaves that club immediately after winning the league title.
Yeah, for another club.
Doesn't get sacked the following season, just leaves. I've won the league, mic drop, and I'm off. Right?
Yeah.
But we talk. Where does Houllier fit into all of those conversations?
Well,
Atkinson and these other, because the club seemed to be so narrow-minded, and I remember it very well. Kendall's gone. Oh well, it's Colin, obviously, isn't it? And it just wasn't. It wasn't up for debate, was it?
Carter should have given himself a bit more time, I think. And correct. I think that's last time out. He was a little bit. He jumped a bit too soon. Carter, whose role in the Kendall departure is also discussed a lot. Rod, yes. He appears to be one of the great mysteries. Is you've been telling people that Howard's not leaving Everton as manager, and you appear to be pretty ambivalent to him going. And I think Howard said in his part in press conference, "I've not spoken to the chairman for 3 weeks." But considering he spent a lot of that time being linked with, to Bilbao, and he didn't say he was helping around European clubs, but he was good as. I know there was conversations with several. I know I think if he'd not gone to Bilbao, he probably would have gone to Atletico Madrid. There was strange ambivalence by Carter, which I don't think that is a good look for Philip Carter. You've got Everton's most successful manager, the most coveted manager in Europe, but you seem to be quite, you sort of don't really care, I suppose, if he goes or not. And again, that's about personal relationships. There's some space there, isn't there? I wonder what that relationship would become in '87. What was happening?
How ironic then? How ironic, Gav, that you've got the Howard Kendall Gladys and the Sir Philip Carter Park end staring at each other.
I think there's just it's just interesting. I would have thought Carter would have made more public efforts and
totally
to keep him and at that stage and then all of a sudden puts Harvey in straight away. And did Carter believe the hype? Well, actually, it's not really Kendall who's the force here. It's Colin, maybe. I don't know. It's just interesting. But in '90, guys, so in '87, there was conversations, I think, with Graham Taylor, and there wasn't a great deal of other candidates. Big Ron had just been sacked by United, hadn't he? Brian Clough, that horse had well voted. Strangely enough, you'd think if Venables had been a free in '87, that might have been a decent gig. But in '90, there's lots of candidates. I'd say Houllier was one. Houllier was, and we was a talk about discussions with Beckenbauer and in Stockholm, and there was one or two others in the frame. Bobby Robson's in there, obviously. Contractually obliged to say that. And the story how Howard gets the job is just basically a massive. Is just I talk about it. It's just a massive social event in Manchester that gets a bit out of hand, and I think it's a good story really, and I think it was basically he grounds off with Swales, and I'm not because of what had happened with England, and he was doing a good job at Man City. To be fair, he got them he got them ahead of Manchester United. He had a lot of good young players, Paul Lake, David White, people like that, really good young team. And then he got told, again, this is where, some of his off the pitch activities come into it possibly is he just makes a bad decision himself. I mean, I think I said on the first part, Howard 87 to 93 makes a series of bad decisions from a place of strength. You are the top man in European management probably. Yeah. And you throw it all away through a series of bad decisions. And coming back to Everton was definitely a bad decision because he was re-establishing his reputation at Man City.
Yeah,
he was, I say, he'd been in the frame for the England job.
Gav, doesn't he just phone Everton up though? I mean, don't
he didn't phone up
Harvey, and he phones up and says, "I'll have the job."
He got yeah. The story's in the book. I won't talk about it, but yeah, he gets somebody else.
Spoiler.
Yeah. It all happens over like an extended drinking session, and like it's
Harvey
fascinating.
Comes back with him. And Harvey comes back as his assistant.
Well, that
was the pair of them. She was.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things like that with Everton, though, isn't it? Where it's more by luck than design, or even bad luck by design. I just think of Joe Royle. Like that was just a miscommunication. Wow. I'm moving on a bit there, but
yeah. Well, to be fair, lads, I mean, talking about candidates, is Joe Royle was the obvious candidate in 90. He was. I mean, Howard. I don't even think they'd even thought of Howard. To be fair, when his name came up, they just thought, yeah, definitely get Howard in. But I think Joe would have been strangely enough, a far better choice in 90 than 94.
Yeah.
I think he would have grown into the job in the same way Moyes grew into the job a decade later.
Yeah.
I think, and being a former player, he had an advantage over Moyes even. I think by the time Joe comes back in 94, he'd had 4 years baggage of old and being relegated, and the club had changed, and that change probably put him in a different place as a manager compared to 90. I think Joe would have been a far better manager of the club in 90 and 94. And I tell you what he would have done. Joe would have sorted out the dressing room, because I think Joe had the personality to do it. I think Joe would have been a better choice in 90. And Howard comes back, and I say, Rog, it's just there's you created one problem bringing Howard back, and you double that by making Colin. Let's face it, contributed to sort of the dressing room splits and stuff like this by not being able to handle it. He comes back as coach, and it's just daft if you think about it logically. And I think also the mad thing is when they appointed Howard hadn't told him he's bringing back Colin as coach.
No, that's right.
That only happens after the, So I know they didn't say, "Oh, Howard, you're coming back. Is Colin coming here?" No, they said, "Yeah." Howard said, "I'm coming back." He pointed to his manager, "So by the way, I want to bring Colin as my assistant," and that absolutely browns off, I think, a lot of the directors, and that's not a great start, is it? And very strange.
You can see with that then. So Everton have kind of made, let's say a handful of odd decisions over the course of the 3 books. Let's say a handful. I'm being a bit kind there. A handful of odd decisions. We've probably made more odd decisions in the last 5 years, to be honest, the way things have gone. So just to move it on to sort of present day, what do these new owners need to do now to not repeat the mistakes of the past? Because we can look in recent history and say, don't do just whatever Mashiri did, don't do that. But from these conversations and reading the books, it's a lot more deep-seated, and there's loads of errors to pick up on.
For one final bit, just to actually defend the Everton on this, about this, how like things get changed over the years, is in '77, there's that story, isn't it, about Bobby Robson gets the job. And the story is the board leaked it to the press, and the press said, and Bobby Robson's turned his car back to Ipswich and went back. That's not true at all.
Oh, right, okay.
It was the southern desk of the Daily Express that found out about the story and run it. And my understanding that this story came from the Ipswich board, who were quite keen to keep Robson, so they leaked it to the press, knowing it didn't come from the Everton board at all, or even the Northern Daily Express. It was the Ipswich board leaked it, and the boards have always had stick over that, and it wasn't to do with them. It's one of them things. One of them. Rod, you talk about a lot about sliding doors moments, and that gets brought up. Oh, that's just like, because I had Bobby Robson in '77. Oh, the Everton board, it was their fault. It wasn't. It was the Ipswich board told the Southern Desk of the Daily Express.
It makes me clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you said at the start of the last one that one of the things you hate to hear, Gav, is that we want our Everton back, and I couldn't agree with you more. But now I'm Dan Friedkin. I'm an American guy who, 10, 20 years ago had never heard of Everton really, and may have been spun a story about heritage and tradition, and but as we've kind of explored here, and as you do in the book so brilliantly, that Moores era. Not Moyes, the Moores era, through Catterick and through Kendall, and 4 league titles. Whilst it was 4 league titles and the most successful period of our history of ownership, right? There were still problems, and there were issues that were never really addressed, of insularity, mistrust of outsiders, and refusal to accept the modern game, foreign players, the Premier League, commercialization, and all of those good things. So if we don't want our Everton back, how can these Americans coming in, how can Kinnear coming in as a new chief executive with his experiences of Leeds and Arsenal and West Ham, and this whole new team coming in, how can they not give us our Everton back, but give us a new version of Everton? Because actually this history that we've been clinging on to, isn't quite as glorious and is ever more distant by the passing year. What was your top tip?
I think it's important. It's an important thing, isn't it? I think listening to these 2 pods will probably be a decent starting point for them, Rod.
Excellent.
I think we need to talk. I think it's important to understand though why we are where we are now. And before I was talking this morning, wasn't it? There's a great documentary came out about 10 years ago called Hypernormalization. And that is a big word, isn't it? And what it is, it's about how governments in the 90s and the 2000s, they realise actually countries are just far too complex to change. You can't fix it. So what you do is you create an alternative reality for the population. This is where all fake news comes from and all this type of thing, and you feed that. And then what happens is, that over time they accept it, and then that becomes the norm, and that's what they're comfortable with. And I think, I'm just talking about Everton here. I think what football clubs have done a lot of over the last, certainly because of the social media age, the internet ages, is many respects those clubs who are not successful, i.e., winning trophies, they create that sort of alternative reality, don't they? That's not really about winning trophies and being successful. It's about a different set of parameters, how you measure yourself, isn't it, really, and what you're comfortable with. And so, I'm picking on Everton there because we know it's your heritage, isn't it? It's your fan base, it's the stadium, it's all this type of stuff. Which we judge it as, look at our list of firsts and all this type of thing that we've done. That becomes success, doesn't it? That's because our success criteria. In reality, we're not winning the stuff that we should be doing for lots of different reasons. A lot of it outside the club's control. That you're not got 500, 600 million pound a year, or that type of thing. It forces clubs into a sort of alternative, I think, an alternative football reality that actually fans buy into. And you've spoken a lot, Rog, in different podcasts around, FC, Cozy FC and stuff like that. And I think that applies to supporters as well.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think that the culture, our fandom is like the population of Russia in the 2000s is now fully attuned to that and is comfortable with it and finds it quite cozy. And and I think that's where we are as a club. There's actually 2 different things going on: footballing on the pitch reality and off the pitch stuff that we think is success or view it as success and celebrate. And
importantly, Gavin, just let me butt in for one moment. Importantly, we sing about it because we tell everyone that we are respected wherever we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the song. And do you think we actually are, or do you think we're a bit of a basket case?
If I was, somebody once said that, well, probably a bit harsh, but a bit like in the Premier League, we've been like Coventry hanging around the First Division for 30 years, not really doing much and just being there, And And I think that there are fans in the Premier League viewers like that. I think we deserve more respect than that, obviously. But
of course,
and that's part of the thing. Like, great away fan base and stuff, and all this type of thing. But lots of clubs got great away fans, and that's what we think is success. And we're quite comforted with all of that, aren't we? And there's and I'm not blaming the club. It's just a natural. It's a natural flow of events, isn't it? Really, and picking up on this hyper-normalization theme. And if I was the Friedkin group, I'd recognise that type of. That'd be the first thing I'd look at. Is how do you address that culture within the fans? And that's been allowed that they're comfortable with, because that's the thing is, and a good example, City, isn't it? Really, there is still lots of Man City fans who prefer that when they were in the third division, weren't they, playing at Chesterfield and winning titles.
I tell you what, say the same.
Yeah.
So when they were like sort of flirting with the Premier League in the late 90s, they preferred it like about 5-10 years early, when they were like getting about 40 fans down. It's strange, but is it just a nostalgia thing, though?
Yeah, it is. But that's what we're trading off, isn't it? That's the success of but we're maxing out on nostalgia, isn't it? Really, because actually the present reality, in terms of being successful, doesn't really exist. And I'm not blaming the club for that, because just the way modern football is set up. Witness Newcastle winning on Sunday, and I think that is one of the, you really underestimate. You've got to change that, haven't you? That's the thing. You've got to change, and I don't think changing that comes from winning trophies. I think it comes from something else. Because it was interesting to see City on Saturday, wasn't it? They're obviously struck the moment to see the number of empty seats in the Etihad on Saturday for their game.
Yeah, against Brighton. Yeah,
against Brighton, because they're struggling and they've not got great players and and all this type of stuff. Well, a few people aren't going, and so I think it's that coziness within the fan base that needs to be addressed as well. And the biggest thing is and there's lessons in history here, it's the commercialism of the club, isn't it?
What do you mean by that?
Well, because we're not, the culture of the club and the coziness, that doesn't really change, doesn't it? Rodger, you know more about this stuff than me. Okay, if we change to a commercial beast and focus on that, then that sort of, isolates the fans a little bit, doesn't it? Really, that would be against what you believe in, the culture of the club and the FC cozy bit, And I think that's the challenge. And there's a lesson in history there. Is in the early 70s, Rodger, you've read this. When our attendances started to drop because we weren't being successful, Moore sent David Exel, who was the commercial director, to America to come back with ideas. And he come back and he said he'd come back with ideas about the commercialism of the club. So then you get like the 300, 500 club at Goodison, people playing premium seats for games, all this type of stuff. And then, quite rapidly in the space of a few months, Goodison just became a home of wall-to-wall advertising around the ground, like the perimeter advertising. They had the scoreboard, which is constantly, fed advertising before and after the game and stuff. And for a lot of fans, that was just anathema to them. They don't want that. They just, because what was happening, Liverpool win a trophy at the time, none of that at Anfield. And the club got accused of being a business first and a football club second. And he said, like, at Anfield, it's the opposite. And because of the Scouse values and all this, our heritage is really important. Is that's what we fed off. For the TFC to move on and move us on and get the best out of Bramley Moore and stuff, that's something you have to have regard to, don't they? It's massively important.
Yeah, there's a tipping point though, isn't there? Which I think we're seeing at Anfield now. Because you're getting a lot of Reds complaining about the atmosphere of the game. There was a lot of it moaning about the atmosphere of the cup final on Sunday. A lot of people on Twitter saying, there's clearly fans do it's the first game. Because they've chased that sort of, they've sung about like supporters all over the world for years. Now those supporters can go the game. It's like it's not quite something to shout about, because they're taking up places of what they would say is like proper fans, I suppose. At Everton, we're at the sort of the early stage of that potentially, whereby we've now got the new stadium. where we can sort of play to that crowd, the day tripper crowd.
You can start new traditions, can't you? Because it's not like you're changing the family home.
There is a tipping point whereby it then takes away what your club is, but then I suppose the contradiction here is, what is our club and what do we want it to be?
Yeah, well, exactly. This is what I want Everton back. Well, I don't want that. I want something new. But it has to be moderated, doesn't it? It has to be gradual, doesn't it? And I think that the lessons from, like, going back to the early 70s is we're very protective of that.
Yeah.
Aren't we? Even in the early 70s, we're very protective. It was even in the 70s, it was still a very, because of our rich history, it was still a very nostalgic club in the 70s. You're going to look at the old programs, and I think there's a couple of things going on there. Is looking out to that cozy FC thing within the fan base, and we were talking about, you know, what we class as success and what we celebrate and cherish is, you know, that can hold you back, and that needs to change. But it's how you change it, isn't it? And you can't do everything, can you? You know,
no, this is where Moyes has got a double-edged sword, you know, Gav, because Moyes comes along, and, you know, we talk about if you know your history. Well, if you know your history, we were trying to create a European Super League in the 1970s.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, let's forget about that bit of our history, right? But Moyes comes along, and unfortunately, again, a sliding doors moment, perhaps a slip of the tongue, but he says the People's Club, and the minute he says the People's Club, Ken writes all over it like a rash. And you might say that a new identity is formed. And we've always been a strong community club and doing a lot of great work in the community, and Everton in the community. Absolutely wonderful, laudable thing. But almost the balance and the cultural balance changes. Yeah. And we can't be the People's Club at Bramley Moor. And we can't be the People's Club even today when we're talking about Christopher Ward selling special commemorative watches for starting prices of £595. You know,
that's a fair shout. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, how do you balance those two things? Christopher Ward, I mean, I'm getting emails offering me a watch for £600. I wouldn't spend £600 on a watch anyway, let alone one that commemorated this. And how can you be the People's Club and survive in this commercial world? So that's why you end up clinging on to history, nostalgia as your only form of identity, because you're dead right. That's our success, because no one can take our history away.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing. Sometimes that's a part of football, isn't it? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you can't say, yeah, we'll go with that belief, and then want to be something else. Want to be like a super club. I think we're some way off that. Want to be hugely successful and competing. There's one shades off the other. It's very interesting. I do think, by the way, I just wonder generally, going back to the hyper-normalisation thing, is I wonder whether in football, because football clubs, especially big clubs, are, you know, they're economic beasts now, aren't they? With lots of movable parts and lots of stakeholders. I wonder when it starts going wrong, whether actually you can change it now. I think Man United are finding that, but Man United is such a complicated business, huge business, but, you know, in football terms, and very complicated. I wonder how I think what they're finding out there is actually it's far too complex to run as a successful football club. And if you can make it work,
when you're not winning anything, when your form has fallen off a cliff, and this is where the Reds have been so clever. Our rivals have been so clever because they keep winning bloody trophies. They don't leave it too long. Okay, they've lost a cup final, lost to PSG. They're going to win the bloody league, you know, which is almost as amazing as us winning the league in '87, because, you know, there's hardly no one challenging them this season. They've almost won it by default, you know, because you sort of talk about our squad in '87, their squad this year. You know, it's not exactly the greatest they've ever had. And so, you know, unless you can keep winning, and you were talking earlier about clubs that live off nostalgia and stuff. I'll tell you the other Premier League club that I think does that just as much as us and performs this sort of elaborate confidence trick on its supporter base. And see if you agree with me. Tottenham Hotspur.
I was just about to say Spurs all day long there. And I thought about this. The reason I thought about this before, because obviously they moved to a new stadium, didn't they, 6 years ago?
Exactly. And got nowhere.
And the lesson there is like the lesson that we've got to learn, isn't it? It's all because you get extra income and stuff like this. It's not that easy. Football clubs, I know I said about Man United having difficulty. I think anything from the medium range clubs that, with all due respect, are not your Bournemouths and your Brentfords and Brightons of this world, I think it's difficult to change. It's difficult to move on. I know Villa have done reasonably well, haven't they? And I think that's the lesson about it. It's not as easy as what you think. There's a lot, even as Club Everton said, there's a lot of complicated things going on. And the lesson of history is we're going to be left with a choice here, aren't we? Is to forget all that stuff and just accept a new commercial beast, whatever it is, going forward, or go back, or remain like the citizens of Russia in the 2000s, very comfortable with your lot and quite accepting of it. There's I won't say it's binary, but there's you can't have both, and it'd just be interesting to see. I mean, let's face it, we're getting on a bit. Younger fans may look at it differently, mightn't they? To be fair,
yeah, I think you can look back at it nostalgically if you can remember some of those good times, and if you're more of a locally based or have roots in the city, right? But you're not going to attract a plethora of American and Asian fans if you're waddling around 12th, 13th, and get knocked out in the fourth round of the cup every year. You're not going to do that.
Absolutely, totally agree with that. And that's the thing about that was, one of the things going forward and this is with the Freegans to address, isn't it? There was always that story, wasn't it, about Abu Dhabi Group, wasn't it? When they looked at Manchester City, one of the things about Manchester City is you have to name the city in your, be based in your name. In a global game, if you haven't got the name of where you are, people know in England where you are, but people in Malaysia or Singapore or Hong Kong don't. And and I think that was one of the reasons why we weren't looked at, because of that lack of geographical identity, amongst others. And I think that is one thing that will hold you back in a global game. I mean, there's a reason why West Ham played at the London Stadium, isn't there?
Yeah. And they put London on the badge, didn't they?
That's the sole thing. And that's one of the things that the Freegan Group needs to address. I don't think you can ever address that. Will hold us back in a globalised game, and does, unless you want to call ourselves, play at the Liverpool Stadium, maybe. And
the Liverpool Blues. Let's rename
Liverpool Blues,
Blues.
But they laugh about it.
Soccer.
But it is a big issue because we talk about but you've got to be able to identify where you are.
One sort of counterpoint to that is Everton is a word that's only synonymous with football, so there is that to play on. A bit like Arsenal, that they're not identifiable from anywhere in London, but they're doing okay. I think the thing I've always liked about Everton is that the fact that I know sort of geographically, and for people to think, where's this club from? It's not great, but it's a word that is only ever used really in a football context, isn't it? I think that's something the club can play on, could maybe use that as the brand. But just to finish, I think sort of moving forward, the big sort of headache we potentially might have, and it'll be a nice headache to have given through what we've gone through. If we do get a modicum of success, that does bring with it different fans to the club, and it could see season ticket price rise. It could see fans who've gone for decades priced out. This is the thing I can't quite square in my head. Is that is it like, do you have to go down that route? If you're winning things, do you have to play to that crowd, bring in that revenue to maintain that success? Because if you do, I don't know. It's not the club for me, because I might not be able to afford to go. And if I can't afford to go to the game, it's like, well, what's the point?
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's
a tricky one, isn't it?
I think you can be creative, Les. I really do. Yeah. I think you can be very, very creative in the 21st century. And I think you can maintain affordable season ticket prices. But I think you need to do stuff about accessibility of those season tickets. I think maybe you can buy 10 games a season, 12 games a season, or the whole season. But I think the club can make up that revenue from perhaps increasing the prices for corporate hospitality. I think in the future, clubs will be able to have their own channels and stream their own games and make money out of that. And I think it should be possible for particularly, American based brand owners who are used to doing this, that they don't make their money from ticket sales at the stadium or the basketball court or whatever it is. I think it's possible, but I do think season ticket prices and walk-up prices will rise. They will have to rise because that's the modern world. But if you put the ticket prices up and you have happy hour on the beer for an hour before the kickoff, then you can do a kind of quid pro quo, can't you?
I'm just a bit worried my CH postcode might bite me in the arse if this becomes a thing. Only L postcodes will get the cheap season tickets.
I think you'll have to. Yeah, it could be tricky, But I've heard that the ferry's going to be running over, so that'll save you a little bit on the tunnel.
Oh God,
yeah, going to be running.
I'm all for getting it's been a dream of mine to get the ferry to the game. It just seems like a great thing to do. I've got tickets for the second test event, so I might be getting the ferry over, I think.
And just thinking of the start of the Live Birds, Les, a bit of nostalgia for you, going back to the early 70s,
Oh, yeah. You remember that Neris Hughes?
Neris Hughes, yeah. But it is, and I think it's been really good. I think we've been two great podcasts, and what we've, out of 2.5 hours, whether been speaking is, you can bring it up to date with the frequents, can't you, and say, like, or what we've been discussing, and some of the issues that have been discussed there is stuff that it should be in your insight.
Yeah, and I think as well. Sorry, Rog.
No, it's just such an opportunity. It's brand new owners, a brand new stadium. We're coming out of the biggest washing machine experience of the last 3 or 4 years. Your heads are still modestly scrambled. We can't get over the fact that it's March and we're not threatened with relegation. It's just unbelievable. So there's so much positivity within the fan base. David Moyes is back. He is the Messiah. And there's such an opportunity for them, and I think it could be the last chance really to actually get back to the top table, because when we were at the top table we kind of misbehaved and weren't very comfortable at the top table and left others to take over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we are. I think everyone can agree we are in a very, very unique position, and we just need to try and make the best of it now, and just not do what we've maybe done in the past. That's it for this episode of the end. I say episode like it's going to be a series. Cheers to that, Gav. It's been great to have you on and talk about the books.
Listen, these have been brilliant, both with yourselves. Not just saying that. I mean, these are the best podcasts I've ever been involved in, and some of the feedback I've heard off other people have said, like at the match on Saturday, have said exactly the same. I think that we go some way to hear better content than what we've done over the last 2 pods. Really, I think it's been expansive, original, and going forward, I think we've tried to put some solutions in place, and what the problems that need tackling on the basis of what we've learned over 2 podcasts, and I think it's been brilliant.
Yeah, nice.
I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think that's the general feedback I've had.
We've had a lot of good feedback as well. It's been
great.
Just before we go, then, just remind everyone, if they've not already got the book, they should have by now. But if not, where can you get them?
It's a trilogy of books, but at the end, it's my third trilogy, a third of the trilogy, and final one of the Moors trilogy. There may be another one, and it's history of Everton 60 to 1994. The end, you can get on Amazon. Mount Vernon Publishing is the goes through locally if you want to support your local publisher, and in all good bookshops, and hopefully they'll be giving you a taster. What's in the book is a lot more, obviously, than what we just discussed here, explaining why we are where we are.
Yeah, they are 2.5 incredible books so far. I've nearly finished the second one, so I'm sure they are 3 incredible books. But where I'm up to, I'm nearly up to the end of the 70s. Cheers, Gav. Thanks a lot for that.
Cheers, fellas.
That's
pleasure.
the end.
Top man,
we will catch you next time on the Blue Room.